Hello and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb Keith, and Thinking Fellows is brought to you by the 1517 podcast network of shows. You can go to 1517.org/podcasts to see all of their shows there. Today, I am joined by Adam Francisco, Scott Keith, and Bruce Hillman I've lost count now, but what is episode 4 and now a 6-part series that I thought was going to be 1 or 2 episodes, which is incredible. But today we are asking in our series on a Lutheran identity crisis, are Lutherans Protestants? Now this one comes around on the internet like every 18 months to start a fury of arguments between Lutherans and other Protestants, usually with some small group, kind of strange group. I'm sorry for those who listen and are part of this group, but who get really mad at being called Protestant. And so here's my question to you, and we will go around, guys. Are Lutherans Protestants? Adam's laughing, so I'm gonna give Adam a first crack at this one today.
Well,
Are we Protestants?
because I want to make that weird little group even angrier. Yes. You're like evangelicals, the original Protestants.
That's right, baby.
We did a little bit of talking before we hit record. Now it's escaped me because I've had so much coffee. My brain is like going 100 miles a second. But I'm just going to say by 1530, I think it was 1529, 1528, especially the princes, the political authorities that are meeting with imperial authorities to negotiate, if you will, liberties for Lutherans. They were referred to as the protesting princes, from which we get the term Protestant. Was it Spire, Scott? The Diet of Spire?
Diet of Spire, and then the big hit is, like you said, 1530, the Augsburg Confession, literally signing their names to the Augsburg Confession to show their protest.
Yep. So I'm going to say yes, though if you gave me a martini and put me in a different context, I might say no.
Well, it's not Sunday, so no martinis for you.
It's all it takes for Adam to change his view.
And it's 10 in the morning, though that's not stopped me. Just kidding, listeners.
Yeah, right. In airports, there is no time.
Amen. So I'm sorry. Did you want a better answer, Caleb? You're kind of quiet. I mean,
I don't know. I think it's fine. It's a fine answer. I'm curious about. I know Bruce has some maybe insight into this. Why are people suggesting that they aren't? When this comes up, I'll just put it this way. This has always been confusing to me because just like straight historical record, no emotions involved, or as little as I can muster. Like, it's undeniable that the Lutherans were protesting, and the first protesting churches and regions. And so then it seems to me, though, that Protestant comes to mean, for Americans, something else, which is almost anti-Catholic, or I've seen some other people that it means specifically Reformed, as in like Calvinistic, Reformed traditions. And so Lutherans are out. That just seems odd to me. I mean, Protestant in the most generic sense, just means not Catholic at some point. So, Roman Catholic. So I just find the whole "we aren't Protestants" thing interesting. Now, there's some doctrines that people associate with Protestants, like, sort of representative views of the Lord's Supper, or I would say some people lump in credo baptism, though a lot of Reformed traditions don't practice that either. So it just seems weird that you would get like separation from all the bad doctrines by rejecting this. But Bruce mentioned last week that there might even be some scholarly argument about this. So Bruce, I'm going to let you take a crack. What is the, if you know it, the root of the argument that they aren't Protestant, or Protestant isn't a good description?
I've grabbed 2 quotes actually for this. So I tend to follow Philip Carey, who's done quite a bit of work on this. There's an article you can get online for free if you're interested. It's a little bit long, But it's kind of, I would say it's one of the out there if on an academic side, if that's what you're interested in. And it's called Why Luther is Not Quite Protestant. So it's not denying, of course, that Luther is connected with Protestantism, but it's also recognizing that the word itself has evolved in modern use to mean something much more complicated than it did when the Lutherans broke away. But that's not quite Protestant. I'll just read you one of the quotes I have here that I think we'll have it. Carey says, "A useful mark by which to locate the widening crack is the doctrine of baptismal regeneration. If an American revivalist could ask Luther whether he was born again, whether he was a born-again Christian, his answer would surely be, 'Of course I'm born again. I'm baptized.' Someone who gives such an answer does not think a decision for Christ or a conversion experience is necessary in order to be a Christian. It is enough to be baptized as an infant and then believe what you are taught, for instance, in a catechism. Hence, it is not surprising that there is no revivalist tradition native to Lutheranism or Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, all of which teach baptismal regeneration and practice infant baptism. There are particular complexities in the story of the Reformed tradition, which typically practices infant baptism, but does not teach baptismal regeneration." And so he goes on to say that, as we shall see, Luther's doctrine of justification by faith alone takes shape in the context of Catholicism, where justification occurs wherever true penance does. That is, in Catholicism, that's what they say. In this regard, Luther is not quite Protestant enough to believe that justification happens only once in life. For Luther, this is Carey's big point. Protestants, not counting Lutherans, believe in a conversion experience and find some way of their assurance in that conversion experience. And Lutherans do not. They believe that conversion is a continually operating thing as they repent and believe in the gospel. And that sets them different from Catholics and different from all the other stripes of Protestantism. And therefore, they're more Protestant than they are Catholic in the whole general scheme of things because they believe in the word alone and not a pope. But they're not quite the same kind of Protestant that everyone else is Protestant. And if we make the assumption that Lutherans kind of are in one camp or the other, Carey's saying we're making a mistake. Lutherans actually occupy their own space. And I found that argument persuasive. I haven't made the argument. I'm just telling you what it is. You can read the article if you want to actually follow the argument.
Okay.
I'm looking at Scott's face.
Well, Dad, do you want to work through this dilemma? It is an interesting argument, but
what Adam and I are suffering from is what we normally suffer from, which is just a certain amount of dispassionate, look at where the work came from. So in that sense, yeah, absolutely. Lutherans are not only are they Protestant, they are the Protestants in the historical sense. So Lutherans are the Protestants, and then they kind of give leeway for other movements to occur, including Zwingli's movement and Calvin's movement and others, who then are also not Roman Catholic and sort of get thrust into this overall basket of, not Roman Catholic and not Lutheran. And so people just glean on to the word Protestant. But as far as the group that was actually called before the councils, of the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire to give an answer for their divergence in teaching from the Roman Catholic Church, it's the Lutherans. There are likely some examples of this within other movements, but by the time these other movements really gain enough hold to make impact, the Lutherans have already had these meetings with Roman Catholic officials and officials of the Holy Roman Empire and have already been labeled this. And so every other group for a long time is just a long time, a couple decade or two, just a sub-label off of that from Lutheran. So it's interesting. I think then you have 500 years of history in between where Lutherans really do distinguish themselves from other um, reformational, I guess I'd say, movements. Um, and then we get the generic term Protestant that gets attached to that. So, in a sense, you could say any group that publicly distinguished itself from not just Roman Catholicism, but the Holy Roman Empire, and had some sort of state structure by which they could be supported in doing that, were originally Protestants, and then it just became a generic term for not Catholic. Now, Lutherans are, you know, the Anglican Church is a whole another bailiwick, but it's often called the middle way between Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. And to some degree, that's true. But Lutheranism often can be seen to fall into that camp too, mostly because it didn't sort of take on a lot of the movements of abolishing icons and abolishing the liturgy and all that type of thing too completely. And so that gets even a little trickier. I think when most people, sort of your people that aren't really aware of Reformation history would struggle with Lutheranism being Protestant, it's not because of any of the Philip Carey reasons regarding, a real sort of intense look into baptismal regeneration. Though I had a question about Bruce's description of that. But it's more just because they're still liturgical and still sort of wear robes and stuff like that. And so, and this is anecdotal, but my experience, and I kind of would say collectively, Caleb, our experience with this, when you invite other non-Roman Catholic sort of evangelical Protestant Christians to come to a liturgical Lutheran church, they don't connect us with Protestantism because the pastor wears a robe and there's a confession and absolution and there's a liturgy and there's the formal singing of hymns and there's a communion every Sunday and things like that. And so they, in their mind, their connection is more to Roman Catholicism than to Protestantism. But they don't, that's totally forgivable because most of those people don't have any sense of the history of the Reformation at all. I mean, most of those people don't even have a sense of why they're not Roman Catholic, and how their theology over the course of the last 500 years landed where it is, which I would argue has kind of come full circle and is just, on the other side of the circle from Roman Catholicism and their theology and practice. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, Caleb.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do think the baptismal regeneration question, I think, does come up a lot. That it is the Lutherans, I think, would be accused of holding a novel view of baptism, right? If they're amongst Protestants, and same with the supper when it comes to Protestants as well. That we just don't share we don't have the same sacramental theology as the Protestants. I think one of the frustrating things about this, and this is sort of the overarching theme of this series, is that Lutherans, because Luther really is the first reformer with any level of success and then political weight behind it, and protection, as we've talked about on past episodes, that Luther really had this unique being protected from bodily persecution in many ways, that we were first to the table of all these names, that nobody else would have gotten first pick, right? We get evangelical first, we get Protestant first. We can sort of lay claim to these. The sad thing is, or the interesting thing is like we've seemingly lost all titles that we've ever had but Lutheran. Like, we can't be Protestants because all of the other Protestants believe things about the sacraments that we don't believe, and some other things too. And we can't be evangelicals because that's associated with revivalist movements that have sort of reactionary political positioning from the 1920s forward in America. So we can't really have that name because we're not involved with that either. And so it's like, and then we can add the third one we're going to do next episode, which is Catholic, which is, that's too confusing for other Protestants to understand who you are. So you can't really call yourself that either.
There's a historical reason for that, though. The Counter Reformation Adam, 1540, like 5 to 15. I mean, I'm gonna went on, but starts 1545 ish.
Yeah, well, I mean a little earlier, but I mean that's good. That's good. Yeah, the Council of Trent,
Um,
right? Which was a
yeah,
very long council. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, intentionally was a Roman Catholic movement that was intentionally intended to strike at Protestantism generally, but Lutheranism in sort of the lands that we would now call Germany. It was successful. I mean, Lutheranism shrunk, um, whereas some of these other Protestant movements that didn't have that at least initial attention of the Counter Reformation grew. And so at the end of and then you have more modern movements like the Fourth Prussian Union and things like that that kind of when these movements were combined, and Lutherans and Reformed were told to worship together. Essentially, what happened is that Lutheran theology and Lutheran form of worship diminished, and more reformed styles is what uh, really took hold. And so Lutheranism had some direct attacks on it that just diminished it in numbers. Not to mention the Smalcaldic Wars and all the controversy that erupted from that after in 1547, 1548. And then, I mean, it's been a turbulent road. And it's not that it hasn't been for other movements, but it's been a turbulent road for Lutheranism, which has just meant that the the once sort of ballooning numbers didn't really stay at that sort of uh, year over year, end over end growth that it originally did for 30 years or so.
Yeah, it's just I do find like when we talk about the premise of this kind of thing where like Lutherans have this hard time describing or identifying themselves, or I'm going to put it this way, marketing themselves to other Christians in the West and in America, and you run into people and they're just like, we don't understand who you are. Like, I don't understand who Lutheranism is. I understand what the evangelicals are. I understand what the Reformed are.
We've never had an extremist
We
position
have
to
like
market.
yeah, I think that's the thing. Is like we don't have we just don't have
What do
one
you
of these
what do you
things to go
mark?
up.
What do you market? Like the capitulation to the mysteries. Oh God!
Can I? By
That's
the way,
sort of just explained in the scriptures and just going, well, I guess that's
I
what
do
we
want to
believe.
I do want to point this out too. So this includes, I mean, for people who want to roll their eyes, this includes the ELCA numbers, but Lutherans,
Can I roll my eyes?
yeah, okay, thank you. There you go. But even without those, Lutherans outnumber Presbyterians in America 2-1, and we have no cultural recognition, influence,
But that's not.
naming.
What if you take into account Reformed, sort of Reformed Baptist, like
Okay,
general followers of John Calvin?
okay.
I'm sure that that's not the case anymore. Might be, but I'm sure it's not.
I mean, even if the number gets close, I guess the frustrating thing is it's not like there's been no Lutherans in
No, no,
America.
no. I wasn't arguing that. I was just
Yeah.
saying, for 30 years, it was an all-consuming movement in this area. Like, I mean, the numbers, like, just because when the princes, basically, when the princes said, "Hey, I'm a Lutheran," yeah, I mean, pretty much your entire area was in Lutheran. The churches changed over and everything. It's just exploding numbers. But when there was two functions of fighting back. One was an intellectual fight through the Counter Reformation. The other was an actual fight through the Smalcaldic Wars, and other means, and just it had an impact.
In a way, okay, get ready for a joke. So you got to have a laugh canned. Luther opened up a can of worms at the Diet of Worms when he said, "Here I stand, I can do nothing."
Oh my gosh, that was so funny.
And when he says, "Unless you can show me from Scripture or reason," and then he appeals to his conscience. It's neither safe nor right to go against one's conscience. The Lutheran movement, Scott, you're right. It was just it. Did you use the verb ballooned? I think.
Sure.
But then there was nothing to keep it from, I guess, boiling over and can I use the word evolving or progressing, or I don't know what the right word would be here, into all these other things, like very quickly. Think like right after Worms, Luther gets kidnapped. He's in the Wartburg, and he hears about these guys who were thought they were prophets. The famous Zwickau prophets, right in 1522. And I mean, very, very quickly, like right in the first couple of years, you get Thomas Munzer becoming this radical reformer of a sort. And so,
And he meets with Zwingli by 1529.
yeah. So you have so to Bruce's point, or when he refers to Philip Carey, and our problem, Scott, is we kind of think that words are fixed. They have fixed meanings.
I know. It just gets
And that's the thing, is they don't. And you throw it in an American context, American Christian context, all bets are off. The history of, Dan Van Voris is the guy who could speak to all the wild aberrations away from classic Christianity that emerge in early America, especially at the Second Great Awakening. But you already see seeds of it in the First Great Awakening. So, and that's very early on in the days of the Republic, even before the Republic. So, if that becomes what is defined as Protestant according to the American usage of the term, it's no wonder that Lutherans look so odd. And it's no wonder that we don't have really a place. But I'm going to be a little snarky and continue with my mean streak, trying to make people angry. The reason why we aren't recognized publicly is maybe has something to do with our reluctance to engage in the public arena. Think of like the Missouri Synod. Well, it's not just the Missouri Synod, but it took till after World War I for us to actually start using English, because we get stuck in our ways,
it's part of that. That's like,
I'm like, that's so baller. Yeah, maybe this is the problem. Maybe we're the problem. Like I hear that and I go, like, hell yeah. Like
I'm sitting here thinking, hey, Caleb, it would be very evangelical of us to start doing German only worship in Big Bear, wouldn't it?
yeah, wouldn't it?
I mean, because I've had so much coffee, I just want to say, "Ist das nicht ein Schnitzelbank?" And we could just start singing that song. Anyway, we got to get like an AI tool, because I don't know about you, Scott, Caleb, Bruce, my German's pretty poor. So if we get an AI, maybe it's called a plugin that would move our mouths differently and put the German language told their thing. Like, that'd be awesome.
My German's very poor. Jim Nestigan, when he wrote a letter recommendation for me, at one point it said his skills in Latin are superior. His skills in German are adequate.
Raised his eyebrows.
That's what I had to take. I don't know I assume you had to take some sort of language exams when you're doing your PhD. I remember I did well in the German, then the Latin, and then I did the Arabic. I had just done it for like a year, and I think they said something like sufficient.
Yeah, that was I think I got passable or something in Greek and Hebrew.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess this just has me at a loss, because I feel like I try to wield this confusing situation, and maybe this isn't the right thing to do, but when I talk to other Protestants, because I'm finding more and more that evangelicals, non-denominationals, some Reformed traditions, Reformed Baptist, Calvinist, whatever, when they get along to go do things, they gather under the banner of Protestant. Like that's so whether it's something like a homeschool co-op, or it's like some March for Life or something like this, some social gathering, they all rally under the banner of Protestant. And I've been using this like, hey, we're your great grandpa. Like, you should listen to us. Like, because they'll
The OG.
be weird, and I'll go like, hey, Lutherans, the original Protestants, definitely don't do that. Like, you should, and here's what great grandpa has to say about that. And I'm not sure if that's effective or not, but to me, if you're going to cling to a tradition, which a lot of American Christians at least will generically cling to Protestant in some way, I feel like there's a way for Lutherans to leverage our connection to this to say, we are the origin or a primary source text in your tradition, if you're going to claim Protestant. And so some of us are still around and adhere to these primary source texts of the quote Protestant tradition. Maybe we could help you navigate some of these ideas. because you've been
I-
Protestant your whole life or for generations without thinking about what that means besides I'm not Catholic.
And without
Um,
really what I find is even more, and this is, I don't want this to degrade into just,
bashing people.
yeah, but what I find even more frustrating than, hey, I'm just not Catholic, is without really even an acknowledgement why you're not Catholic, like, or a reasoning as to what would be so bad about being Catholic, which I can do, but and then when you ask that, it's really interesting when it comes from people who theologically are much more dependent on sort of,
Works.
works. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That, to say, well, geez, those Roman Catholics over there. And you're like, uh-huh.
Your point.
It's like- and you go, and so, I'm always just kind of like, yeah, interesting. Yeah. And it's the funny thing about that is when you sort of hang out with them and teach classes for them and have conversations with them, you realize that they're not even really oftentimes shying away from the works orientation of their theology, such as it is. In the same way that an honest Roman Catholic wouldn't. In fact, I'd say modern Roman Catholics shy away from it a little bit more than sort of the modern Protestant, evangelical Protestant does, which is kind of funny. It's a funny thing to me. But I don't know. This is anecdotal experience on my part, not universal. I like Adam and I have said before, I'm actually more continually impressed by the modern evangelicals move towards, in some areas, towards a more reformational theology than they would have ever had in the 90s.
In my experience, and this is purely anecdotal, but in my experience, most Protestants don't care to even think about whether they're Protestant. So, in other words, the debate, as I understand it, as I've experienced it, really has to do more with theologically minded people and traditions. So the Baptist that I know doesn't care. They're Baptists. They don't identify as Protestant. If you ask them, are they Protestant versus Catholic? Of course, they'll say they're Protestant. But that's not a category they use except to say in contradistinction to Catholic. I think in my experience with Lutheranism, what makes it tricky is Lutherans are either just completely obsolete. They're not seen. They're just not around in those circles of the other Protestants, like Caleb said, in some of the community events and other things, or any famous preachers or writers that they would know about on the national level. They just don't know. And if they do, there's such a big difference between the two biggest groups, right, which are the ELCA and the LCMS, and people don't know that. So they drive by a Lutheran church and they see rainbow flags outside, and they just go, okay, that's what Lutherans are. And most of at least out here on the East Coast, most of the really pretty churches that are Lutheran, that are kind of in downtown, in the higher real estate valued areas, are ELCA. So that's the face of Lutheranism to a lot of Protestants as they drive by, is whatever that church decides they want to put out on their lawn. So I think that hurts Lutheranism too from other Protestant groups, because they don't even, a lot of them that I've talked to don't even know there's more than one kind of Lutheran, honestly. I mean, they have no idea there's all these different synods or anything. They just go, oh, you guys are liberal, right? You're like Catholics, but you're liberal Catholics. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Yeah.
I recently, there's a good friend of mine have recently made that argument for saying that he does not like using the word Lutheran to describe himself. And I was like, because he's a solid confessional Lutheran. And I was like, huh? And he goes, yeah, well, it's because in my circles, when I tell people I'm Lutheran, they assume I'm ELCA, liberal, wackadoo. And he goes, it just makes the conversation more difficult if I'm trying to talk to them about the gospel and Lutheran theology. I said, well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's,
I have a
now we're losing that too. We lost we lost Protestant, and now we're losing Lutheran. What are we gonna go to, guys?
I have a Muslim friend. He and I we exchange memes. Okay, and I don't know if I started or he did, but I would send him, for whatever reason, the algorithm, which I'm starting to hate, would send me these online, I think it was on Instagram, online Muslim muftis, like people who, like, if you have a question, can I own a dog, or can I marry my cousin? and is it lawful in Islam to do these sorts of things, right? Because that was the latest one. So I would send him, because they were kind of funny, because they're very like just kind of rigid. There's this one, he's great kind of classic mufti. He's somebody sends him a question, says, "Why do you never smile?" And he says, "Because I'm not a clown." And that was it. And anyway, so I'd send it to him, and he thinks they're funny. So he sends me like goofy stuff from Christianity, especially because he knows that I'm Lutheran. He sends me, it's all the, what's that creed? That rainbow creed or what, sparkle creed? But he just assumed, and I have to tell him, like, every time I see him, I'm like, that's not me. But it just, I don't know, is it not registered? But he, basically his view of Christianity is the stuff he sees, and certainly Lutheranism is the stuff he sees everywhere, despite my protests. So I want to mention one other thing about public or Lutherans, confessional Lutherans, if we want to use that term in the public arena, and why we're not, I think, Bruce, you mentioned why we don't mix with other Christians, conservative Christians or whatever. Part of it, I wonder if it has to do with the fear of unionism or being accused of a unionist. I remember one day learning that the hardcore, I don't know what we should call them, the ideologues among the confessionals, accusing Rod Rosenblatt because he was in a picture with, maybe it was Jim Nestigan or somebody, as being a unionist. And I don't know, Scott, when I heard that, I was like, okay, this movement has gone bonkers. If there's somebody who's not a unionist, it would be Rod Rosenblatt. And then
Well,
they
he used to get those accusations from hanging out at Ace too. Like,
yeah, but I think it was more in jest, But now it's a little more serious, You get, if you care, if you're rostered or whatever, you can get brought up on charges and things like that. So it's like it's not just the outside that those that aren't us that cause us. We do it to ourselves. We shoot ourselves in the foot by just keeping our mouths shut. It's a lack of.
I'll add to that, Adam, that, and I'll give a little plug for us here because I think it is pertinent. Which is, there's 1517 is really one of the only, maybe the only in the English speaking. I don't know about the rest of the world, but only really engaging organization from a Lutheran perspective into kind of cultural consciousness. Most Lutherans who do that, it's either they're talking to other Lutherans, they're not interested in talking really to other groups. They have a lot of conversations about kind of intra-Lutheran issues and stuff. And I don't know what it is about modern Lutheranism. It doesn't tend to like cultural engagement. It seems to be afraid of it. I think it believes at some level it'll go liberal like the ELCA did if it engages in cultural stuff. So anytime that we could ever potentially remotely with a 9-foot pole even have echoes or smell or anything that would even scratch next to anything the ELCA is doing, we don't want to be associated with it. And therefore, we just can't do any cultural engagement without criticism. And I think that's a real poverty that is in modern Lutheranism.
I want to jump on that a little bit, Bruce, because I don't disagree at all. I do think, and I'm really not trying to insult anybody here, but when we do that, or you look at sometimes the people who really are excited or enthusiastic or trying to start a movement to do more of that engagement, they are often not our best or our brightest. And because of that, I'm like, I didn't name anybody.
I didn't say you should do that.
Okay. Right.
He did keep to the rule of not naming names.
I don't even have anybody in mind. I just want clear the air there. But that I think it's like a trust thing. It's like, well, so and so who's really enthusiastic about going and doing this thing is like, one of the worst people I've ever heard in a Lutheran church talk about long gospel. You're like, oh, should I really, is that what we want? And so then it gets shut down. And then the people who are really kind of the best and the brightest or are good at those kinds of things are like, nah, I'm good. I'm good writing my books, or I'm good preaching at my church. And that's kind of what so I think we do get in this bit of a predicament too, where there's just a trust thing. It's like, well, you're trusting the reputation of all of us on one or two representatives to the public, and the people who are really enthusiastic to be those representatives are often people I would say the majority of Lutherans might not trust to do that, and so then you get caught in this catch-22.
But I would say, I would add that
that sort of environment is what
if I could just
that
add
sort of
to that real
environment
quickly.
is what you would call toxic. That sort of environment is what you would call toxic. I'm just saying. And like your dad and I had this conversation over the weekend. I have to get, I want to get like a coat, you know, and there's all these ones with pocket squares. So I call him. I'm like, hey, is it okay if I wear a pocket square? Is it too pretentious? And I had other words I was using too. And he's like, bro, do what you want. Who cares, right? And so I think maybe we, and I'm certainly guilty of this, worry too much about what the person, and there's good reason for this, is going to say down the road, maybe the pastor down the road on his Facebook page is going to say about us. And I think we lack leadership is what we do. Muscular, masculine leadership, kind of like my rant last episode. How would we just sort of start asserting and confessing what we believe confidently and not care what people think about us?
Yeah.
But
I was just going to say with what Caleb had said, and I completely agree, Caleb, just in addition to that is I think that would be anxiety about these people who are representing us aren't our best representatives is also itself a problem within Lutheranism, because what I see in, say, mainline evangelicalism, which we talked about, or the Baptists, or any other groups, is they kind of can just read the context. They're like, yeah, that guy's not from my tribe, but he's kind of saying what I agree with for the most part. He's coming from his own flavor. But yeah, I can get behind that. Like, I understand. Like, he's on my team. He's more on my side than other people. And they just can do that. And they can just embrace it. And Lutherans, for whatever reason that I don't completely understand, they're so worried about doctrinal precision that they can't always read the room and realize that there's a lot of allies around that would be really good friends and allies if you could just take a chill pill for a minute and read the room and be like, the guy who's with us is not against us. He comes from a different tribe, but like C.S. Lewis says, like, just be nice to the other people in the room. Like they're in the house too.
That's one of the approaches at 1517 is why we can do, like, why Bob Hiller and I can go on a Theocast episode at one of the Here We Still Stands. And I will say, though, that we always leave that conversation going, man, those guys, like, they have come away from sort of their position and towards our position thing. And I'm always just like, wonder why they're not just Lutheran. But the goal in those conversations is to bring, if you honestly believe that Lutheran theology is the best representation of scriptural theology out there, the goal is to bring that to other people, be that non-believers, I think initially, in an evangelical and apologetic way, and then to other Christians who you think are, very close to you, but are really sort of missing out on the beauty of scriptural theology as it's represented in Lutheranism and the Lutheran confessions, and to try to bring it to them in also sort of an evangelical way, and not to be a jerk about it. So it's funny when we have these conversations, and we've done it several times at public gatherings with people who aren't, or I've done it several times at public gatherings with people that aren't Lutheran. The funny thing is, I'm never giving anything up of our theology ever, and or at least I'm doing my best not to. And the conversations are always great, but what ends up happening is that all of a sudden, that type of Lutheran theology, that sort of hard-hitting law gospel confessional Lutheran theology, has now been introduced to a different audience that maybe have never even heard anything like that before, and that's a good thing. I mean, if you think it's the truth, it's a good thing to be enough of sort of just an everyday man with other reformational Christians that you can then get that confessional Lutheran law gospel message out to a broader group of people, because it's like, going fishing. Got to put the line in the water, right, Caleb? That's how fishing works.
That's how fishing works. Yeah, I do think. I mean, the The other thing that's unique about 1517 now, this is becoming like a bet on the back session. So
Well, it's only the
trying
last like 4 minutes of the
yeah,
show.
but so we're not going to try it too hard. But is it a lot of people, I guess to my other comment, a lot of the people involved who do speak, who podcast, whatever, were coaxed into this, right? Like, in the sense that it's like, dude, you got to like post something on your Twitter or your Facebook or something like, like you got to like you got to do it. It's not the person first volunteering to like go do public things with other people in a lot of cases, right? Like we have to get Adam a martini in order to get him the podcast. So it's like, we have, so I don't know. I think there's something about that too, where it's a lot of people too. I think that's the other strength is 1517 has a pretty big roster of people in the fellowship who it can pull from in order to talk on specific subject matters or topics or at conferences. And so you'll see a lot of the same people doing some stuff, especially people who are employees. But you also get like every conference, there's new breakout speakers. There's new people in the mix who have been writing for us or have been a guest on something, who are a pastor somewhere or a teacher somewhere doing something. So it's definitely interesting to be able to pull people out of the woodwork to come do something public every once in a while. And I think it's a good strong suit of ours. I also think when you do something, Lutherans have to figure out in the public arena, because I also think when we do things with other Christians, we can sometimes, in order to like get along or find the base level of agreement, like, some law and gospel distinction or something like that, we can come off as like, yeah, they're kind of cool, but they're, what are they doing that my Reformed guys that I like listening to aren't? They agree on law and gospel. Like, I do think making sure to still have some of those Lutheran distinctives. Like, I think Lutherans take law and gospel farther, for lack of a better term. Like, that distinction drives harder, but with sort of no third kind in there. Or talking about baptism, like very exactly. If you're at a conference with other Christians and you talk about these things just very concretely, and you eventually get to part of the Lutheran distinctives, I think that would give people something to chew on while also getting along with people. You don't have to be anti everybody else's position in the room to also make your positive case. And I do think we have a tendency to do that. Like, first, let me set up what's wrong with your view of baptism, then I'll give you mine, and things like that. And it's just I don't know. It's a habit of us, again, to bring it back to the topic of this episode, not wanting to quite be identified with the rest of the Protestants. I do think we have to trust that our ability to make a positive case for our position won't just get confused with other positions. So I think that's the worry. Like, if you just give a positive case for our view on the Lord's Supper, you're worried that somebody in the audience might interpret that as being the same as theirs. And you do have to let go of that kind of thing.
You can't control that.
Right. Yep.
That's the thing. You can just keep making the argument, and you can say this is what we don't believe. I mean, our confessions do that, and by believing this, we don't believe this, and that's certainly viable to do that. But you still can't control what the person out there, how they process that or how they incorporate that into their mental framework, and it's just sheer arrogance to think that you ever could. Plus, at some point, if you're really teaching a theology that is grounded in Scripture and preaching that to people, you got to believe that the promise of the Holy Spirit comes with that. And at the end of the day, it's His job to actually convict the hearts of people towards right belief, not yours. You can just make the argument in as scriptural and reasonable way as you possibly can.
Adam, you looked like you were going to say something, but
he was just agreeing with me wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I was actually just fighting a yawn. Sorry.
Oh.
Wow.
Boring.
No. Just no. Come on. I've got a 1-year-old and I'm 51 years old, so I'm a little sleepy. It's a caffeine crash.
Oh, well, we're gonna go so Adam can get his third, fourth cup of coffee this morning. But all right, well, I interesting episode. This one was a little less concrete, I think, which is interesting in the sphere of them. But I do think there is a caveated historical way to say you're Protestant without giving into the whole American Protestant thing. So definitely, I don't know. This is definitely an interesting one. And next episode might be the most interesting with Catholic. So look forward to that next. Are Lutherans Catholic? And what could we possibly mean by that?
I'm going to say yes.
Oh,
I'm going to say yes just to
Include the
get
whole episode.
just to get Scott angry.
Well, with that, listen next week. Subscribe if you haven't already. We thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.